I have been an archivist of the conquered for 240 years. In that time, I have recorded the admission of 9 new species, the dissolution of 4, and the quiet settling of a great many disputes that never rose to the level of violence because we had built a galaxy in which violence was no longer a tool that anyone reached for. I tell you this so that you understand what kind of person I am. I am not a soldier. I have never held a weapon. My people gave up weapons 11 generations before I was born, and by the time I came into the world, the very concept of a battlefield was something I knew only from old records that I myself was responsible for maintaining. So when the humans were admitted to the conquered, I was assigned to observe them, not because anyone expected trouble, but because they were a curiosity, and curiosities are catalogued. The day they joined, the council did not call it an alliance. They called it an adoption. The word in our language carries a softness to it, the way you might speak of taking in something young that does not yet know how to care for itself. Humanity had come to us out of a region of space that had seen 4 major wars in its recorded history, and they arrived still carrying ships that were built to kill. The council found this distasteful in the way you find a child's muddy hands distasteful, not alarming. Simply something to be cleaned. The Concord's official position, which I recorded in the Central Archive under the Admission Codex, was generous in its phrasing. We would welcome humanity. We would teach them the disciplines of peace that our older civilizations had mastered. We would help them outgrow the habits of conflict that had marked their short and bloody history. There was, in the language of that document, no cruelty. There was only the certainty of an older people looking at a younger one and deciding what the younger one would become. I remember the human delegation standing in the Great Hall. There were 6 of them. They were smaller than most of us expected, and they did not posture. And when the council's senior speaker delivered the welcome address, with its long passage about the burden of teaching them to lay down their arms, the humans listened politely and said almost nothing. One of them, near the back, was holding a cup of something hot and dark, drinking from it slowly while the speech went on. I noted this in my record because it struck me as strange. We were telling these people that their entire history was a kind of sickness we would cure, and one of them was quietly enjoying a drink. I did not understand it. I wrote it down anyway. That is what an archivist does. We write down the things we do not understand, and sometimes, much later, we understand them. It would be 60 years before I understood that cup. The Harrow came from beyond the rim, from a stretch of dark that no conquered vessel had charted because there had never been a reason to. We were not an expanding people. We had what we needed and we had made peace with its edges. The first sign of the Harrow was not a fleet. It was a silence. A mining colony at the system of Varen Hollow stopped transmitting. Then a research station. Then a colony of 40,000 souls on a temperate world that had been settled for 3 centuries. By the time anyone understood what was happening, 11 worlds were simply gone. I do not use the word loosely. They were not conquered. They were not occupied. The Harrow did not want territory the way territory is usually wanted. They consumed. They arrived at a world and they took it apart, living systems and mineral and atmosphere alike, and they moved on, and what they left behind could not support life and never would again. We sent observers. The observers did not come back. We sent a second group, with instruments built to record from a great distance, and those recordings reached the archive, and I cataloged them. And for the first time in my 2 centuries of service, I found that I did not want to look at the thing I was required to preserve. The council convened. This is what the conquered did when faced with a problem. We convened and we debated and we sought consensus, because consensus was the foundation on which our long peace had been built. For 31 days the council debated the ethics of response while the Harrow took 3 more worlds. There were members who argued that any forceful response would compromise the moral standing that defined us. There were members who argued that we had a duty to protect our citizens. Both sides were sincere. Both sides were eloquent. Neither side could do anything because we had spent 11 generations making certain that we could not. We had no weapons. We had no warships. We had no one alive who knew how to command a battle because we had been so proud of the fact that none of us would ever need to. I recorded the 31 days of debate in full. It is the longest single entry in the modern archive. When I read it back now, I am ashamed of it. Not because the speakers were foolish. They were not. They were thoughtful and principled people doing exactly what their civilization had trained them to do. I am ashamed because while they spoke, a world called Aldous Mar, with a population of 2 million, went dark, and the record of its death sits in my archive directly after a speech about the importance of not acting in haste. It was a junior counselor, a member of one of the smaller species, who finally said the thing aloud. She stood and she said that there was one people among us who had never finished laying down their arms, and that perhaps the time had come to ask them. The hall was silent for a long moment. Asking the humans felt, to that room, like an admission of failure. It was an admission that everything we had taught them was about to be unlearned, and that we would be the ones to unlearn it. The vote passed by a narrow margin, and I was sent, because I had observed them before, to be the Concord's eyes among the humans. I was instructed to record everything. I want you to know that I did. I expected to find savages. I'm not proud of that expectation, but I will not lie about it in a record that is meant to be true. I had spent my life cataloging humanity as the species we were going to civilize, and somewhere in that long work I had come to believe my own catalog. I expected anger and bloodlust. I expected to find people who had been waiting, resentfully, for the day when the rest of us would come crawling back to ask for the thing we had told them to be ashamed of. I found none of that. The human force assigned to the defense of Thessaly's reach numbered 11,000 personnel and 41 vessels. By the standards of the histories I kept, this was nothing. The Harrow had consumed worlds. 11,000 people and 41 ships seemed to me like a single hand raised against an ocean. I said as much, carefully, to the officer who had been assigned to host my observation. Her name was Iris Halloran, and she commanded the defense, and she was not what I expected either. She did not boast. When I told her the size of the Harrow incursion, she nodded and asked me 3 precise questions about their consumption rate, their approach vector, and the time we estimated remained before they reached the inhabited world she had been sent to protect. When I answered, she thanked me and went back to a screen covered in figures. There was, beside her, a cup of something hot and dark, and she drank from it while she worked. I remembered, suddenly and across 60 years, the human in the great hall on the day of the adoption, drinking quietly while we told his people what they would become. I asked her because it had unsettled me for 6 decades what the drink was. She told me it was tea. I asked her why she was drinking it now with a devourer civilization bearing down on the world below us. She looked at me as though the question itself was strange, and she said that the Harrow would arrive when they arrived, and that being thirsty in the meantime would not help anyone. Then she offered me some. I declined. I did not understand the gesture. I wrote it down. Over the days that followed, I watched the humans prepare, and I learned that I had misunderstood them in a way that was deeper than I had realized. I had thought they loved war. They did not. I watched them work, and I came to see that they found the whole business exhausting and grim, and that not one of them wanted to be there. A young sergeant named Cole Mabry, who had taken it upon himself to explain things to me when his commander was occupied, told me once, while he was repairing a targeting array with his sleeves rolled up, that nobody back home thought war was glorious anymore, that they had gotten that nonsense out of their system a long time ago. I asked him then why they still kept their weapons, when the entire Concord had given theirs up and called it wisdom. He thought about it for a while. He was a slow, careful talker. Then he said that giving up your weapons only works if you also give up the people you would use them to protect. He said humans had never figured out how to do the second part, so they had never managed the first. He shrugged when he said it as though it were obvious, and went back to the targeting array. I did not write that down right away. I sat with it. It was the first time I understood that the thing I had spent my life calling a flaw in them might be something else entirely. They did not keep their weapons because they wanted to kill. They kept them because they could not bear to lose. I had thought those were the same thing. I was learning that they are not, and that the difference between them is the most dangerous thing in the universe. The first true contact came 8 days before the main swarm. A Harrow scouting element, what we estimated to be 60 of their consumption craft, broke from the main body and struck the outer edge of the Tesselley system, where there was a small refining station and 400 workers who had refused to evacuate because the refinery fed 3 other worlds, and they did not want those worlds to starve. I was on Halloran's command vessel when the contact came through. I watched the humans receive the information, and I watched something change in the room, and I have spent years trying to describe that change accurately because it is important and because it is easy to describe it wrongly. They did not become excited. They did not become angry. They became quiet and focused and very fast. Halloran gave perhaps a dozen orders in the space of a minute, each one short, each one answered with a single word. Somewhere in that minute, a junior officer near me finished his own cup of tea, set it down with care so that it would not spill, and turned to his station. The ordinariness of it, in the middle of what was about to happen, made the hair on my back stand up in a way I could not explain. Then the humans moved. I had catalogued battles. I had recordings of the old wars going back thousands of years, my own people's and others. I thought I knew, intellectually, what combat was. I did not. The recordings had never conveyed the speed of it. The Harrow scouting element, 60 craft that had consumed living worlds, was met by 9 human vessels, and the engagement lasted 4 minutes, and at the end of it there were no Harrow craft left and all 9 human vessels returned. 4 minutes. I checked the record 3 times because I did not believe my own instruments. The conquered observers who had come with me to watch were silent afterward. We had been afraid of the Harrow for months. We had watched them eat 11 worlds, and we had debated for 31 days because we were helpless. And 9 human ships had ended 60 of them in 4 minutes, and then the humans had gone quietly back to their preparations, and one of them had made another cup of tea. The relief I felt was real. But underneath the relief there was something else, something cold and small, and I did not have a name for it yet. I wrote down that I felt it. I did not yet write down what it was. The main swarm reached Tesselley's reach 19 days after I arrived. There were, by our final count, 11,000 Harrow craft, and behind them the great consumption mass that was the heart of their kind, the thing that took worlds apart. Against this, Commander Halloran had her 41 ships, her 11,000 people, and the world below her with its 60 million inhabitants who had not been able to evacuate in time because there was nowhere in range that the Harrow had not already threatened. I will not pretend that I can describe the Battle of Tesselley's Reach in a way that does it justice. I was there, and I recorded it, and the recording is in the archive, and even the recording does not do it justice. It lasted 2 days. I will tell you only the things that mattered. The things I understood later were the real story. The humans fought the way I imagine a body fights an infection. There was nothing glorious in it. It was grinding and brutal, and it cost them. By the end of the first day, Halloran had lost 11 of her 41 ships and something close to 2,000 of her people. I watched her receive each loss. She did not weep and she did not rage. She absorbed each one the way you absorb a blow you have decided in advance you will not let knock you down. And she kept giving orders in that same short, level voice. And the humans kept holding the line above the world they had been sent to protect. Sergeant Mabry was wounded on the 2nd day. I learned this because I went looking for him during a lull and found him in a medical bay with a metal brace around the lower half of his right leg, and a great deal of blood that was not all his own dried onto his uniform. He was awake. He saw me and he managed something that I had come to recognize as a human smile, the small, tired kind, and he said that I should see the other side. I did not understand the phrase. He explained that it was a joke. I wrote it down, the joke and the explanation both, because even then, even bleeding in a medical bay with a world burning below him, he had made one, and I was beginning to understand that this was not bravado. It was something they did to stay human, inside a thing that would otherwise unmake them. The turning point came in the final hours. The humans broke the Harrow swarm. I do not fully understand how, even now with the record in front of me, because the how is a matter of tactics and engineering that is beyond my training. But I understand the shape of it. The humans found the consumption mass at the heart of the swarm, the thing that made the Harrow what they were, and they concentrated everything they had left upon it, and they cracked it open, and when it broke, the swarm broke with it. What had been 11,000 craft became a scattering of survivors, leaderless, their great devouring heart destroyed, fleeing in every direction away from the world they had come to consume. And then the humans had them. This is the part I was sent to record, though I did not know it at the time. This is the part that the conquered would later spend a great deal of effort trying not to understand. The Harrow were broken. They were fleeing. They were, in that moment, utterly at the mercy of the human force, the way the conquered itself had been at the mercy of the Harrow only days before. There was nothing to stop Halloran from pursuing them. There was nothing to stop her from following the survivors back to wherever they had come from and ending the Harrow as a kind entirely, so that they could never threaten anyone again. By the logic of war as I understood it from my archives, this was the obvious thing to do. You do not leave an enemy alive to return. Every old war I had catalogued had taught that lesson in blood. I was on the command vessel. I heard the officers ask the question. I heard them request permission to pursue. And I heard Commander Halloran say no. She said it quietly. She said that the world was safe, that the swarm was broken, that the threat to the people she had been sent to protect was ended, and that there was no reason to chase frightened survivors across the dark and exterminate them. One of her officers argued. He said the Harrow would regroup, that they would come back, that mercy now would cost lives later. Halloran heard him out. Then she said that maybe he was right, and that if the Harrow came back, the humans would meet them again. But she would not turn a defense into an extermination. She said, and I recorded this exactly, that the moment you start killing things because of what they might do instead of what they are doing, you have already lost the thing you were trying to protect. Then she ordered the human fleet to stand down, and she went, I am told, and made herself a cup of tea. The Harrow survivors fled into the dark. The world of Tessely's reach lived. 60 million people who had been hours from consumption woke the next day to a sky that was theirs again. And I sat on the command vessel with my instruments and my long training and the cold small thing in me that I had felt after the first battle, and at last I understood what it was. It was fear, but it was not fear of what the humans had done. I had watched them destroy 11,000 craft in a consumption mass that had eaten worlds, and that had frightened me, yes, but it was a clean fear, the ordinary fear of a powerful thing. What I felt now was different and far worse. I was afraid because the humans had held the power to end an entire kind, had held it completely, with no one able to stop them, and they had chosen not to. They had chosen. The choice had been entirely theirs, and they had made it in a quiet voice over a cup of tea, and there had been no law and no council and no consensus that compelled them. There had only been a human deciding alone where the killing would stop. I understood sitting there that a people who can destroy everything and choose not to are infinitely more frightening than a people who simply destroy, because the second kind can be predicted. The second kind can be defended against, planned around, understood. But a people who hold the choice in their own hands, who decide mercy and slaughter for themselves according to a judgment that is theirs alone, cannot be governed by anything outside themselves. They cannot be made safe. They can only be trusted. And the conquered had spent 11 generations building a civilization on the principle that no one, ever, should have to be trusted with that choice, because we had taken the choice away from everyone, including ourselves. The humans had never taken it away. They had kept it, and they had just shown the entire galaxy that they would use it exactly as they saw fit, and that there was nothing any of us could do about it. The conquered celebrated at first. There were ceremonies. There was an outpouring of gratitude that was genuine, because the threat had been real and the deliverance had been real, and 60 million people were alive who would otherwise be gone. For a short while it seemed that humanity's place among us had changed, that the species we had adopted as a charity case had become something we honored. And then the council convened in closed session, and I was called to give my account, because I had been the conquered's eyes among the humans, and I had recorded everything, and they wanted to know what I had seen. I told them. I told them about the 4-minute battle and the 2-day battle and the broken swarm, and I told them about the moment at the end, the moment when Halloran could have ended the Harrow forever and chose not to. I thought, when I told them, that I was reporting a mercy. I thought they would hear it as I had first hoped to hear it, as evidence that the humans were better than we had feared. The room went very quiet, and I watched the oldest members of the council, the ones who had spent their long lives perfecting our peace, understand the same thing I had understood on the command vessel. I watched the fear move through them, not fear of human violence, fear of human choice. The motion was raised that same session. It was framed, in the public record that I was later instructed to prepare, as a measure of principle. Humanity, the public record says, would be barred from all participation in conquered military matters, henceforth and permanently, so that the galaxy might continue its long tradition of peace uncorrupted by the habits of war. The public record presents the ban as the conquered gently but firmly insisting that humanity outgrow its violent past. The public record presents it as us protecting the galaxy from them. I prepared that record because it was my duty. But I am an archivist, and an archivist's deepest obligation is to the truth, and so I have prepared this account as well, and I have placed it in the deep archive where it will be found when enough time has passed that the truth can do no harm. The ban was not to protect the galaxy from human violence. We had just seen human violence, and it had saved us. The ban was passed because of what came after the violence. It was passed because a human commander had held the power of extinction in her hand and had set it down of her own free will, and in doing so had shown every species in the conquered that humanity would always, always keep that choice for itself. We could not bear it. We had built our entire civilization so that no one would ever again have to look at an enemy and decide whether it lived or died. And the humans looked at that decision every time and made it themselves, and did not seem to find it as unbearable as we did. We banned them from war because we were afraid of them, not of their cruelty, of their judgment. We were afraid of a people who could be trusted with the worst power there is, because being trusted with it meant they would always have it, and we would always be living in a galaxy where someone else held the choice we had spent 11 generations pretending no one needed to hold. I went to Commander Halloran before I left, after the ban was announced, because I wanted to see how she would take it. I expected anger. After everything, after the worlds her people had bled to save, I expected her to be bitter that we had repaid her by declaring her kind unfit for the very thing that had saved us. She was not angry. She was drinking her tea, of course, and when I told her the council's decision she was quiet for a moment, and then she said that she understood. I asked her how she could understand it when it was so plainly unjust. She said it was not unjust. She said we were afraid, and that we were right to be, in a way, and that she did not blame us for not wanting to live next to people who would always make their own choices about when to fight and when to stop. She said that if she had spent her whole life making sure she would never have to make that choice, and then met someone who made it as easily as breathing, she would be frightened too. Then she offered me tea again. And this time, because it was the last time and because I finally understood what the gesture had meant all along, I accepted it. It was bitter and hot and I did not enjoy it. But I understood at last why she drank it in the Great Hall 60 years ago while we told her people what they would become, and why the officer drank it in the minute before a battle, and why she drank it after she set down the power to end a species. It was not indifference. It was the opposite of indifference. It was a small, deliberate act of remaining ordinary in the presence of enormous things, a way of holding onto the self that makes the choices, so that the choices stay human and do not become something else. We were never able to teach them peace. I understand that now. They had something we had thrown away and called wisdom, and it was not the love of war we had always accused them of. It was the willingness to hold the worst choice there is in their own two hands and make it themselves, every time, and live with it afterward, over a cup of something hot and bitter, like ordinary people. That is the thing we feared. That is the real reason. Not that humans could destroy. We had all once been able to destroy. The fear was that humanity, alone among us, had never agreed to give up the right to decide. And a people who keep that right will always be free in a way that frightens everyone who gave it away. We banned them from war not because they were monsters, but because they were the only ones left who could be trusted with it, and being unable to trust ourselves, we could not bear the sight of someone who could. I have served the conquered for 240 years. This is the truest thing I have ever recorded. The galaxy did not ban humanity from war because humanity loved it too much. The galaxy banned humanity from war because, in the end, we were afraid of the only people who had ever learned to set it down.